Good evening, and welcome to the second episode of the Asia Thinker Series Talkback, hosted by the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. This series is sponsored by the Singapore Global Network, a division of the Economic Development Board. My name is Dr. Taha Hamiduddin. I'm an assistant professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School, and I'm happy to moderate today's discussion titled, A Test of Resilience, Workplace Innovation and Strategies. Today, we are delighted to have two important voices that have played a major role in transforming workplaces as a response to and beyond COVID-19, Ms. Jane Lim and Ms. Shirin Hamid. Ms. Jane Lim is Assistant Chief Executive of the Sectoral Transformation Group in the Infocom Media Development Authority of Singapore. In her role at IMDA, Ms. Lim takes the lead in working with partners in the public and private sector to drive digital transformation and accelerate the growth of Singapore's digital economy, tapping on a range of technologies such as artificial intelligence, analytics, IoT, immersive media, and cybersecurity. She is an experienced public sector leader who has also led teams in both the economic and social sectors. Prior to IMDA, she was the Director of Social Programs in the Ministry of Finance, where she helped to shape key social policy developments and ensure sustainable financing for healthcare, education, social security, public housing, and social transfers. She was also the divisional director in the Energy Market Authority, where she led test beds for new energy technologies and planning for future electricity infrastructure. In addition, she has experience in manpower planning and policy and intellectual property policy development. She has an MBA from the Sloan Fellows Program at MIT, as well as a master's in political science from the same institution. She graduated summa cum laude with a double major in biological sciences and government from Cornell University. Ms. Shirin Hamid is Director General, Chief Information Officer in the Information Technology Department at the Asian Development Bank. She has more than 20 years of executive leadership in digital transformation and innovative use of information management and technologies for large, complex, multinational, and multidimensional organizations at an international scale. As CIO of ADB, she is responsible for the bank's digital strategies and transformation, as well as its IT infrastructure, operations, and talents spanning across more than 30 countries. Under her leadership, ADB was awarded the 2019 CIO 100 Award for its successful adoption of cloud solutions and innovative technologies to support a mobile workforce, improve user experience, and enhance organizational resiliency and IT security. Prior to ADB, Shirin was the Chief Technological Officer of the United Nations Development Program from 2005 to 2016, and prior to that, she was the General Manager of IS and IT in Singapore's Keppel Offshore and Marine, and concurrently of its parent company, Keppel Corporation. She started her professional career as a consultant at Anderson Consulting, Accenture, in Singapore, and subsequently at Deloitte Consulting in Boston, Massachusetts. She holds a master's degree in business systems analysis and design from City University, UK, and a bachelor's degree in computer science from Coventry University. In 2019, she was included among the world's 100 most influential people in digital government for her digital transformation initiatives. In the same year, GovInsider Women in GovTech 2019 acknowledged her leadership in public sector innovation. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I hope you will join me in welcoming today's speakers. The coronavirus outbreak has set in motion one of the greatest disruptions to the global workforce, and it has fundamentally changed the way we work. One need not look further than the transformation of our own workplace routines and the fact that this discussion is being held fully online rather than in person to understand the scale of this change. This new normal has forced governments and organizations to innovate and support a fully remote workforce with collaboration tools such as Microsoft Teams and Zoom for business continuity. For some, switching to and maintaining a fully online work environment on a large scale may generate some productivity gains, especially if they have slack resources and existing digital infrastructure. However, the lack of social interactions is a test to maintaining a creative workplace culture that keeps employees connected and engaged. This creates two distinct challenges as far as the world of work is concerned. Firstly, for the internal environment of the organization, how can individuals drive digital transformation in the midst of a global pandemic and the disruption caused by national lockdowns? Beyond surviving the pressures of the pandemic, can organizations look forward and change their cultures to thrive in this new normal? Secondly, what role can government play in facilitating digital transformation for businesses and for government organizations to become more adaptive and agile? Are there common solutions to these challenges, or are other issues that need to be considered? Both our speakers have professional experiences that can inform these ongoing debates. To respond to these issues and to give us their take, I would first like to ask Jane to offer her views on these challenges, and then I will ask Shirin to do so as well. After our speakers have delivered their opening remarks, I will then pose a few pre-prepared questions, and then we'll refer to questions from our Facebook Live audience. To facilitate this conversation and to keep things interesting, the Lee Kuan Yew School Facebook page is running an online poll on the desirability of commuting. I think we can see the poll here. About 71% of individuals polled say they are better off telecommuting. It'll be interesting to see how these results change as we have this conversation. I would like to now invite Jane to offer her take on these important issues. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, Taha and Shirin as well. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here, and it's great to also interact with everybody on this very interesting topic. I would like to touch on two parts. The first will be about, what are some of the macro shifts that we have seen as a result of COVID-19, and second part will be about the, what organizations can do, including what we ourselves have gone through in IMDA. So the first part, I think it's definitely true that COVID-19 and the whole circuit breaker have accelerated years of digital transformation and just compressed it into a matter of a few months. So it's really shifted businesses' priorities towards digital transformation. What used to be something that was good to have has now absolutely become a must-have. And along with this, fortunately, I think in Singapore, we were fortunate in having certain things going into the whole COVID-19 and the circuit breaker situation that enabled us to cope, I would say, relatively well. First, we have a certain baseline of infrastructure, IT infrastructure and connectivity, because years ago we did invest in the national fiber broadband network, and that has enabled high-speed fiber broadband to virtually almost every home. Secondly, we do have a fairly well-educated population with IT skills. And a third, I think, is the increasing penetration of cloud and software as a service. So that's enabled a lot of services to be delivered remotely. You can access it from the cloud itself. You can store your information on it. You don't have to deal with going to the office as much. And that's been also the things we've been promoting in the last few years to get businesses to take up more cloud-enabled solutions as well. So with that, we've actually, we were fortunate that we started the SMEs Go Digital program several years ago, and we see very good take-up amongst the companies. We start with those who are already at the beginning to say start digital. How are they able to take on certain things, and then go into sector-specific solutions and so on. And I think during this crisis, we've seen some really big shifts, increasing exponential uptake as well. So just to give a couple of examples, the Pay Now corporate transactions, these are payments, e-payments between companies, that has increased 7 times and hit a total of more than $3 billion in February 2020. Another digital utility that we have been encouraging businesses to take up, which is e-invoicing. The nationwide e-invoicing network, we had about 1,000 companies registered on this network at the beginning of March. And 3 months later in June, we have over 15,000 businesses. So there's been a huge increase as well. And in part of this, the government has also been supporting a lot of the uptake. So for instance, during this year itself, the government has enhanced the productivity solutions grant to 80%, to defray up to 80% of the cost for SMEs to take up a digital solution. And that includes even things like laptops, because one of the things we realized in this was that while some of the SMEs have desktops, they may not have had laptops as well, and it was absolutely critical when they needed to shift to enabling their employees to work from home. Now let me just quickly turn to what organizations have done well, or what I think they need to do in order to actually cope with the whole COVID-19 situation. So I think there are three things. The first is really about communication. I think a lot of us have found that it is really important, when you're doing remote working, to just stay in regular touch with your people, whether it's as simple as just a regular daily call, with various teams and so on, and also having town halls where we explain and update on what the organizations are going through and what are some of the things we're working on. Second of all, I think is taking care of not just the work, but also employees' mental health and mental resilience and mental wellness. I think the whole coping with both work from home, many parents, I think, had to cope with, kids being at home as well and trying to get them to learn from home. That was absolutely a big challenge, I think, for many people. So, we found that it's important to take care of our staff's welfare. We've shifted things like, virtual yoga, virtual Zumba, stuff like that. And I think lastly, what's really important is having some sort of motivation, a higher purpose for the organization. And that is about how we contribute to our customers, if you're a business, or how you contribute to the community. So we've launched things where we both try to exercise and also donate to the community. Organizations have come forward to say, how can they help families, low-income families with laptops and so on. I think that's quite important for organizations to have that sense of higher purpose during this time. And I'll just end off by saying, what lies ahead. I'll say there are three things in ABC that organizations need to pay attention to. The first A is agility. The B is for blended, and the C is for culture. So I think A for agility. How do you find that? How do we rapidly change our business models and take on new digital solutions and train our staff all in a matter of weeks or days and so on. So I think that's where organizations have got to really increase the clock speed and delayer and find new ways of working in a much more agile fashion. I think for B, for blended, is about how do we find the optimal balance between face-to-face as well as remote working. I think the jury is not out yet on what is the optimal blend. In fact, I think that's a great research topic. I think some organizations have said they've gone completely remote. I suspect a lot of what we're drawing down on right now is the social capital that was forged, and the relationships that were sort of, established when we were all doing face-to-face. And I think as organizations onboard new people, will find that how do we establish these norms, these cultures? Some of that is probably going to be, we have to come back to office or come back, at least have some physical interactions and face-to-face. I think nothing quite replaces that, but probably it will be somewhere in between. We're not going to go back to pre-COVID, but nor I think would it be absolutely possible to do completely remote all the time. And I think lastly, just about culture, it's important for organizations to define what they stand for during this period of time and build more touch points throughout the organization and just communicate what you stand for, what your values are. I think just to say that we can't only take care of businesses, we can't only take care of business at this time because it's not a business as usual time. And finally, just to end that, say that actually it is not just about businesses. I think both economic and social policies need to come together. Workplaces and schools are the biggest levelers of inequality, and what happens at work needs to be complemented with what's happening in society as well. And I think that will be a great topic for discussion later. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane, for that, for your opening remarks. I think there was a lot there that we could tease out, I think, through the conversation. But I will give the floor to Shirin to offer some opening remarks. Go ahead, Shirin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good day to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm delighted to join this virtual dialogue. Let me first introduce the Asian Development Bank. We're not a typical commercial bank. Instead, we provide loans, grants, technical assistance, and equity investment, mainly to government and private sector, to promote social and economic development in Asia and the Pacific. ADB is deploying assistance packages to help our developing members to counter the severe impacts caused by COVID-19 and address the urgent needs of the sick, the poor, and the vulnerable. When the pandemic started to escalate, ADB responded in April with a US $20 billion package, including $2.5 billion in concessional and grant resources to help countries implement effective programs to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. All this is done in collaboration with other international organizations, such as the IMF, the World Bank Group, WHO, the UN, and the global community. Now, in ADB's COVID-19 response, ADB closed its physical headquarters to all but skeletal staff since March 12. As the pandemic evolved in the Philippines, many international staff left the country and consultants were unable to travel. Our 45 field officers also started working remotely. In many ways, this has forced ADB to transform overnight from being a traditional workplace with strict work culture into a globally dispersed workforce collaborating in teams. To enable the bank to operate seamlessly, digital is playing a major role in shaping and driving recovery and reform. To achieve this, we need to make the right investment at the right time. Adjusting to our reality has been challenging at times. I'm very proud that as an institution, we have had 18 weeks of unprecedented IT service delivery. We provided IT support at scale with amplified speed and resiliency. An example of this is a digital skilling in 3 months, doubling what we did in 2019. 6,000 people in the bank were trained to effectively work remotely in under 120 days. And we applied agility, flexibility, and innovation to sustain and accelerate operations, including releasing 6 new digital products, such as improving our collaboration tools, scaling custom private networks enrollment for each office, and launching virtual hackathon while working remotely. I would like to quickly highlight a few of the innovative items that stands out for me. Knowing what was happening on the ground is critical, and we launched IT dashboards, whether it was about cybersecurity, workforce analysis, IT help desks and service requests, project portfolio and bandwidth monitoring to effectively orchestrate IT service for global operations. As what Jane highlighted, engaging people is key. ADB has been highly responsive to the needs of the personnel. And just like the poll, 80% of ADB's workforce now feel more committed to the bank and their work, with 79% of the bank wishing to make use of work from home regularly as new normal. And 2/3 of the ADB workforce are more openly used to collaborative tools than before. Engaging, communicating, and doing some virtual fun stuff is also important to keep the spirits up and the team dynamics strong. This includes regular communications, pulse surveys, micro-learning sessions to continue to sharpen the skill as we roll out new technologies remotely. Another innovation of which I'm proud of is that we created 13 IT distribution hubs to address staff concerns with the difficulty in movement from village to village, or what we call barangays in Manila, to get into HQ. These are staffed by volunteers with commercial careers as transportation partners. Of course, changing overnight is not easy. We still have many barriers to overcome, including culture, innovation, resiliency, and digital divide between developed and developing countries. Like many other organizations, the pandemic has been accelerating culture transformation, and we will soon embark on a culture review within the bank. For us, we have had an opportunity driven initially by the alignment or the need to align with our strategy 2030 to reimagine ADB's new normal, which is far beyond being reopened in a physical space, as our business has never been closed. With digital solutions so crucial in many areas, ADB is pursuing this through Digital Innovation Sandbox program with a series of virtual hackathons to pilot in a safe space, leveraging on partnership and financing. The organization must continue to be effective, agile, and responsive to managing crisis, and be prepared to shockwaves, so what we call the yo-yo effect, by ensuring that resiliency is embedded in our DNA through daily operations, workforce, infrastructure, and having in place a robust cybersecurity program. Now, 18 weeks into remote work means changing into a new normal practice. What does that mean to ADB? It is shifting from being a digital survivor to a digital thriving mode. To reshape a sustainable future, we know we must rethink our digital playbook. While COVID-19 has helped to accelerate digital transformation, we need to stay on course to deliver digital priorities that brings value and impact while upping the game on communications and adoption and change management. In conclusion, ADB aims to be ready for the next big thing. From the bank's perspective, it's about culture transformation. From an IT perspective, it's about implementing digital thriving. From the development perspective, it's about creating a safe space for innovation to occur together with the right partner and financial assistance. It's about shifting our mindset and actions from being a digital survivor to digital thriving. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin, for sharing those comments. I think they were very helpful, and there was a lot there that we can discuss. I think both of our speakers today mentioned the importance of culture, norms, agility. I think is a word that we've been using quite a lot these days. And I think in both of the perspectives that you bring to the discussion, particularly ADB and also the Singapore government, you started off, one could say, with an existing digital infrastructure, right? So it was a more comfortable place to be compared to not having a culture of innovation or change. So I guess the question I would like to pose to both our speakers is, what kind of barriers do you see for organizations that don't have cultures that are innovative, that like to stick to old norms? I think this pandemic has shifted quite a lot of that, but in order to survive, I think innovation has to flourish. So what advice and what pitfalls, what barriers do you see going forward? So I would like to give Shirin a break, so I will ask Jane to first answer, and then I'll come back to you, Shirin.
Hi. Let me first start by talking about what we do with SMEs digitalization, because I think, we're sort of dealing with we have about 200,000 SMEs in Singapore, and of course, trying to get all of them on board the digital bandwagon, it is a big change management exercise by itself. I think as with any change management exercise, you have to start first with those who are, more ready. There's always going to be somebody within the organization or within a group of SMEs who will be more open to change and just more, it's not necessarily an age thing. I find it is actually very much about someone's internal intrinsic motivation to just try new things, and curiosity, I think, is definitely one of those factors. I like to talk about this. This is a wonderful lady with one of the key initiatives we did during the whole COVID-19 thing was to actually bring wet markets online. So this was the whole Tekka Market initiative. So we did that together with the Tekka Market stallholders. And basically what we did was to teach a few of them how to actually do live streaming because they were facing a loss of income because not as many people could go to the wet markets. And so the question was, how do you reach a lot more people through live streaming, which was something that was very new to them as well. And we even brought in one of the hawkers, a fairly young guy called Max, who was really quite established. And he was a peer who taught the other hawkers how to do it. And there's this lovely lady, Janet, who runs a wonderful fish stall in the Tekka Market. And I always remember that I think Janet's attitude was just, you just try. Right. And you've got to have some of these folks who are just willing to try, just give it a shot. I think one of the key things is to then give them the tools and give them the confidence and also handhold a little bit because, the first time around you do a live streaming, this is going to be hard. And I think there's definitely a lot of coaching and a lot of confidence building and all that's required. But I think once you've got that, you've got the first initial group of people who are willing to do it. I think what the whole Tekka Market thing was, it sparked, I think, a wider realization that, hey, we can do this. Even the wet markets, the hawker centers, the hawkers, can try something like this. So actually, I think what was interesting was that why not other businesses, right? Because if you go in and you find some of these people who are champions of change and actually you give them a platform and actually say, they become the sort of the standard bearers and very much, and then they inspire others to do as well. I think one of the things that, for governments, we can always provide all the tools, the enablers, but I think the capacity for change has to first come from within, from people. And then the next group you get will be essentially almost like a peer pressure because, you will have groups of companies saying, hey, if that guy could do it, and they hear from each other, right? They hear actually, it can be done. I think one of the important things, though, is not to sort of sugarcoat it because it is not that, you just press a button and it will get done. There are challenges. They do have to train their staff. the bosses have to convince their people. You have to try. You have to be, I think, not be prepared, not be afraid to fail. There is a lot of things we can do to sort of handhold and say that, with pre-approved solutions, there's grants to defray the cost. But ultimately, I think they must come. It must be from within. They must want to change, and it is also important that they hear from each other. And I think, share quite frankly what are some of the things, learning points that they have done, what are the do's and don'ts, and so on. And I think ultimately that's how we make it step by step to actually, effect sort of the change management and the culture of innovation throughout the whole organization. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. I think we can all agree if the wet market stalls are going online, then others probably should also, right, if they can do it. I would like to give an opportunity for Shirin to offer her perspective on the idea also. Go ahead, Shirin.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's not going to be far off from what Jane highlighted, but changing an organization even overnight is not easy. And I will say that we started this exercise in 2016 when we drove what we call the IT reforms. And in that initiative, we actually set the stage for a comprehensive adoption and change management program. And that started out with the points that Jane highlighted, ensuring that you have the champions, putting in place and understanding what are the barriers that needed to be overcome, and then setting the cadence for the organization to actually embrace digital slowly but surely. We're using the champions and leadership as a starting point. So the barriers to overcome includes culture, innovation, resiliency, and addressing what we call the mid and long-term digital divide between the developed and developing countries. And I say that because we're situated, unlike in Singapore, in Metro Manila, which in the Philippines, there are challenges, infrastructure challenges in terms of being able to work effectively remotely. Now, to address the barriers to change and adoption, I have 2 points that I'm going to work towards, which is one, workforce engagement, and how the bank support and introduce digital innovation. Firstly, with respect to workforce engagement, we've been successful because we've adapted the workforce in 4 different areas. One is regular virtual communications, weekly newsletters, town halls, to make sure that information flows well throughout the bank, building trust and at the same time transparency. Undertaking organization surveys and departmental pulse surveys, and what's more important is actually acting on those results. For example, we use quantitative analysis to identify stress pressures, seeking team leaders to actually pay attention and take care of teams and making sure they're not isolated, and reducing any burden on IT equipment issues. We also continue to invest in capacity building, such as fostering a learning culture, learning a little bit each day. Now, more than 90% of our workforce found virtual micro-learning sessions to be useful throughout the work from home experience. This was an evolution. Now, we didn't start from right at the start of that just like this. We actually started with a copy center. And from a copy center, we actually evolved to piloting what we call technology learning centers, to the virtual micro-learning sessions that you've seen that I've explained earlier. Undertaking some of the virtual fun stuff is also important to keep the spirits up and the team dynamics strong. In the bank, after office hours, at least for my team, we have TikTok competitions, virtual karaoke sessions, and staff serenading to the teams. For someone who has not done virtual karaoke, I'll tell you, before our team, it was actually scarier for me to present than presenting to the board. Secondly, as to how the bank encouraged digital innovation, we introduced Digital Innovation Sandbox program last year. With digital solutions so crucial in many areas, ADB is pursuing this through a series of virtual hackathons to pilot in a safe space, leveraging on partnership and financing. In late April this year, in partnership with the Asian Institute of Management, we launched Digital Against COVID-19 Virtual Hackathon to crowdsource digital solutions and ideas to help countries in Asia and Pacific to deal with the medium and long-term effects of the pandemic. As the first round closes, we have more than 1,000 participants and more than 500 proposed solutions submitted so far. At ADB, we set the Digital Innovation Sandbox with leadership right from the top. There's recognition that innovation is not easy, even with the bank, but it is possible. There are three factors for success in institutions. First, innovation requires a systematic approach rather than one-off special projects. Second, it takes a whole village to come together to innovate. It is not about a single person. And third, being a champion requires taking risks, balancing innovation equation with controls and safeguards, and giving air to creativity. Have the courage to fail if you want to rise. Thank you.
Thank you,
I was
Shirin.
wondering, Tara, just wanted to add, I think something about, since we're talking about digitalization, I think it is important that we almost never sell technology for the sake of it. People don't go digital because for the sake of going digital. There's just no way that people do that. I think one of the key things is really about what is the job to be done. One of my favorite books is exactly that by Clayton Christensen, and it's really about why is it that somebody, or whether it's the SME boss or the worker or somebody, why would they want to go digital? And you really is finding that language, that lingo to say what is it. And the job to be done is actually about going online just means that you can sell to a lot more people. That's just very simple. You just have to phrase it partly in that way. What does going paperless means? It means that your employees don't have to go back to the office and faced with the risk of catching COVID or whatever. And what is e-payments? It's not about getting paid faster. So I think it is important in a lot of this that even though we come sometimes from the technology angle, we don't sell technology for the sake of it. We don't say you should go digital for the sake of it, because people need to link it back to what is the job that needs to be done and how does it actually benefit them. I think that's critical in how we communicate so as to move the organization along as well. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jane. I think that's a very important point in sort of making sure that the way you frame the digital transformation or the innovation, I think one of the things that Shirin mentioned in our pre-call was to make sure people are not afraid that they will be redundant in this new organization, in this new post-COVID world. I'm going to go back to something that both of you raised earlier on, which is this idea of having to work from home and having to manage. About 70% of respondents said that they prefer working from home, but I think we also kind of have this issue of managing our familial responsibilities and our work responsibilities and the way in which those two blend together. So the way in which I want to kind of frame it is this idea of the inclusion paradox, right? So in some ways, working from home means that, if you need to drive to work, you don't need to have a car. So if you're economically disadvantaged, maybe working from home is better for you. But for others, if you have childcare responsibilities, those inequities may become a lot worse. So I think one of the questions I would like to pose is, how can we sort of manage this in a conscious way? Not saying that digital will be the great equalizer, but also being cognizant of the existing social world that we live in. So I'd like to give an opportunity to Jane to kind of respond to this, and then I'll come back to you, Shirin.
Thanks, Taha. It's interesting. I really like the way you phrased it, which is the inclusion paradox, right? I think there's two parts. First part is, what do individual organizations and I think importantly bosses do? And I think secondly is about what sort of policies that are in place as well in the wider context. So I think the first part is really just that I think empathy is critical for leaders, bosses, managers, and so on. I think, I've never got to know my employees so much as over the last few months, because suddenly you're looking, in the office, we're just all in the office and we're all wearing, suits or, office attire. But, when you are doing a lot of remote work, you're looking directly into people's homes, and there are obviously calls that are interrupted by kids, pets, etc. So I think it is that you get. I think in a way it is funny because it is both the at the same time we're doing remote working, but at the same time you're getting a very intimate look into your own staff's homes, lives, and so on. And obviously there's going to be differences in how people can cope with work, right? Obviously, someone with young kids, and less home support is very different from someone with, much older kids who are able to take care of their own learning and so on. So I think that's important, first of all, to have just empathy and understand that, we are not in the same position. And therefore, how do you give certain allowances, or how do you just sort of help understand that? I think the first point is just empathy and understanding as a manager and as a boss. That's important. I think secondly is then about what kind of policies that have to be at the organization as well as the societal level to help manage some of these inequalities. For the organization itself, I think it is about, building the culture of flexibility and I think understanding. Certainly, we're no longer in FaceTime, but the idea is how do you set that norm so that's not just individual managers, but across the organization, you have trust by default. How do you say that we are measuring outcomes? We're not measuring you, well, based on literally how many Zoom calls you are doing, hopefully not. I think finally, at a societal level, it is about leveling some of these inequalities. In IMDA itself, one of the things we do in addition to helping SMEs go digital, is also about digital inclusion. And how do we make sure that kids from low-income families have access to broadband as well as laptops? And then how do you ensure that even the seniors have this ability to participate in society? So we've also launched a series of programs where they get access to subsidized handphones and broadband plans as well. So, and I think part of that, how, and obviously at the government itself, what we do is that, you have to match the reopening. You don't look at it just in terms of the economic part, in terms of what businesses do, but obviously that whole plan has to be coordinated together with what the schools are doing, what the childcare is doing. I think if you notice, it's a very deliberate effort, such that these go hand in hand. So that when you are able to open the schools and the childcare centers, obviously that takes a certain, that helps a lot of workers as well, and then they are more able to work from home. So I think these things have to be, thought of as both the social and economic policies have to come together. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Shirin, go ahead.
So I'm going to look at it from two perspectives. One from an institutional perspective, and then the other is the work of the bank and the role of the bank. So as an institution, we need to adapt to survive. And this means relooking and rationalizing what was our original digital agenda. We established a comprehensive roadmap when we started the IT reforms in 2016, which has evolved to a digital agenda. But with COVID-19, we're seeing new pressures and stress points. Business as usual activities have increased. There's significant increase in workload executing remotely. There's greater need for organizational resilience while being flexible. There's the greater demand for digital technologies to support a distributed workforce, all the while facing budget pressures to contain IT costs. Thus, there is a need to relook and rationalize our digital playbook and reshape for a sustainable future by taking scenario-based approach. Scenario-based approach for the bank is twofold: identifying what is the new normal and plan for it. And then second, planning for what if the situation deteriorates. In reshaping its digital plan, we're revising our digital agenda playbook, moving from a digital survivor culture to a digital thriving workforce and operation. We need to stay on course to deliver digital agenda priorities that are relevant. So just like what Jane highlighted, we don't want to build technologies just for the sake of technologies. It has to add the value and drive that impact to the bank. For us, this includes continuing to modernize our core systems, replacing systems that are old and dramatically reforming business processes so that it can be automated and online. Forging forward, we need to ensure that we have data governance and information management lifecycle, because this is key to enable coherent data, simplifying report, and enabling an integrated and connected digital workforce. As I said earlier, digital innovation is now more important than ever. We're seeing more requests for sandbox pilots from within the institution and to support operations. This includes building ADB's capacity to be comfortable with digital technologies and solutions. Then we need to reprioritize projects that have constraints. So we have to learn to actually be agile and be responsive and change our course when we need to do so. And then we need to obviously communicate our game plan and reinforcing the adoption and change management program that we've put in place, and then and enhancing our digital scaling program. The second piece is with respect to the digital divide between developed and developing countries. This is an ongoing challenge, even within our organization that is situated in Metro Manila. As we move from physical to digital, including many of our offices who are now situated in developing countries. Internet connectivity remains to be a challenge, impacting our ability to effectively work remotely. And other challenges, and what Jane highlighted, it has to be dovetailed with the social and economic factors, such as opening schools and making sure that we have a safe and learning environment for our students. So for the bank to respond beyond the assistance packages that we spoke about earlier, as a knowledge bank, we're recognizing that digital platforms are changing the way we work. So ADB continues to have knowledge forums to support new research on market and social outcomes for digital platforms, such as our virtual forums for making digital platforms work for Asia that we just recently had in June. It touches upon policy areas that are critical for ensuring digital platform to sustain and create an inclusive development for Asia. Among them includes data security, labor market competition, international tax cooperation, social protection, and addressing COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin. I'd like to take two of the things that both of you mentioned. I think, Jane, you mentioned looking at outcomes, right, in terms of having empathy, but also looking at the outcomes of what employees are producing. And Shirin, you mentioned reforming the core sort of businesses as we think about moving towards a post-COVID world and having the social and economic kind of mix together. So I'm going to take a look at a question that was posed on Facebook by Suguna Jagannathan and Christine Pang about can we measure employee productivity, or how can we think of assessments of workplace behaviors and performance in this new world? Because all those kinds of measures, they have the word workplace behaviors, right? They have the word workplace in them. But we're not in the workplace anymore. The workplace is anywhere where you have an internet connection and access to your computer, your software from your business. So to be specific, how do you see that sort of changing? And Shirin, I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you. As you recall earlier, one of the things that we put in place in order to work remotely was to actually put in place our dashboards. We've got a lot of monitoring tools in place, which includes one of it is project portfolio that will allow us to actually monitor the progress of the IT projects that we've put in place and ensuring that we are on target to deliver on them. Second is workforce analytics. Within our HR group, we have a group that has established not only the annual work plan, and we calibrate the work plan as we hit COVID-19, and then putting in place the analytics behind that in terms of ensuring that we are either A, delivering on those targets, and in actual fact, when we look at the targets of what we've delivered in the last 6 months, we've realized that we've actually gone over and above the original work plan. And I think that was, from our perspective, the need to actually replan something that's more sustainable for us to actually operate, especially remotely. Having those dashboards is actually critical. It gives us not only the baseline for how we operate in the past, but then in setting the cadence of how we want to actually move forward. Whether we replan our initiatives and then subsequently put in the constructs and the analytics behind what is needed to measure the performance of the bank. Now, part of this process is also taking into consideration the context and the way we work. With the new way of working, I think it's important to have that empathy and recognition in terms of how the conditions of the workforce, and then applying that to be effective in the way we deliver on those objectives. So circling back on how we measure employee productivity, in the case of the bank, we have been successful in terms of putting in place upfront a work plan, being able to calibrate that as we need to do so, and then measuring them with our workforce analytics that we have actually established across the bank. And then subsequently using these analytics to ensure that we can calibrate as we move forward.
Thank you, Shirin. I think that's a great answer. And there's a lot, I'm sure the person who asked the question would be would have a lot to take from that. Jane, go ahead.
Sure. Well, Shirin, I think, has done a really comprehensive answer. So I'll just add on just a little bit. I think, first of all, just like, the technology has always been there. I think all these things about outcomes have always been there. Nothing has changed in a way, because you are supposed to measure people by outcomes and hopefully not how much time they spend in the office. I think what is that shift is really about managerial perhaps attitudes, or figuring out that you can't just measure people by their inputs. So I think that's great, because you actually are supposed to try and measure people by outcomes. But what that means is that the team or organization has to set really clear, quantifiable outcome targets, and actually that isn't as much a process of trying to figure out how do you measure what is your impact. I think that's a very important question, because it's not about the number of inputs you're trying to do. We constantly have discussions, about what is the impact or the outcome of a program, as opposed to, how many inputs we actually are trying to do. So it's always part of an ongoing conversation. I think though what has changed is and I like what Shirin mentioned about, workforce analytics or employee engagement. I think, we used to do all these, I'm sure many organizations still do these annual employee engagement surveys. I think what we're finding the need for it right now is that you need much more. You complement that with, I think, much more regular dipsticks, and there are many HR tools that are coming out that allow, HR managers and, organizational development people to figure this out, because it's almost like taking the pulse of an organization. I think just as you take the temperature, we all take our temperature twice a day. It is important to get into much more regular pulse sensing, and I think that helps you spot issues early on, especially when we're not able to see each other. I think that's actually the critical part that does, and I think it's only just the beginning. I think there are a lot of HR tech firms that are coming out with new products and services that are going to try and help organizations do this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. I think both of you highlighted some really interesting points, having the analytics, and it was very interesting, Shirin, that you mentioned that the performance was higher, I guess, right, than you had anticipated, and that's very interesting to see. I guess the larger question, I think, is something that, Jane, you mentioned earlier on, which was, it's an open question. When a year from now or 2 years from now, how would the new workplace look, right? Even physically, will we have shared offices? Will offices at home be a permanent fixture? And how, whether these increases in performance, whether they will be sustained. So let's say for 2 months we're in a lockdown and our performance goes up, but going years from now, are we able to sustain creativity in a workforce that's sort of in a knowledge economy? So I guess I'm asking you to maybe speculate, which I know is unfair, but if you could humor me and the audience, what do you see for in the future workplace a year or two from now?
Well, I certainly hope a year or two from now we'll be able to be face to face. Haha.
I hope so too.
I think as with the fun thing about these things is that we get to speculate, right? And hopefully maybe we're grossly wrong after this in a year's time. Who knows? I think, like I said, I think it's about the blendedness part of it. So I think there's going to be at least I hope. I think there's going to be a shift in the sense that we're not. I think a lot of organizations have realized that actually remote working has been easier to get into, and that's really because it's been a coordinated move at the same time. When both your customers as well as your workforce, everybody is trying to do this at the same time, I think that makes the shift much easier. I don't think we're going to go back to pre-COVID-19, where we commute to the office daily. That's good for employees, that's great for the environment as well. I think a big shift is there. I think what we'll probably get back to is probably some blend of 70-30 or 80-20, where I think quite a fair bit of time is going to be spent at home, and maybe that's good for people's concentration and productivity, but there's going to be certain things that we'll discover along the way that actually you just need to get into face to face, or and I think some of these things we're starting to discover are business relationships, especially making new business contacts. I think every business leader I've talked to so far has said if they can, while they've been able to sort of do new business from existing business contacts, it's been really hard to develop new business relationships, especially if you're talking about cross-border travel and so on. You just have to be sort of there at least at the very first part. So I think there's one. There are also going to be certain kinds of things where you just realize that you just need to get into a room. We had one discussion where we're trying to figure out how 3 different new IT systems were going to interact with each other, and at some point in time we decided it was better to get into the room and draw it out on a whiteboard because we wouldn't, I can't quite promise what the IT system is going to look like if we try to do it all virtually. So there's going to be some of these things. And I think the last part is about, team meetings. And I think people start having a pattern where we schedule some of these things and we come back a little bit more. But, I think it maybe will be 80-20. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. Shirin, did you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. The future of workplace, I agree. I think that's going to be a shift and some of some blended workforce, working remotely and at the same time working in the office. I think right now, at least in our situation in the Philippines and developing countries, is to make sure that it's safe and healthy for staff and the workforce to actually commute remotely, and how do you actually put the constructs to make sure that that's available. So that's more from the immediate need perspective. I think once we address that, then the question is, the dynamics of institutions. So as an international bank, 20% of our workforce is our international staff. So there are implications if they work outside duty stations. So they're not in Manila, whether it's a tax issue, whether it's the benefits issue, and so on. So each organization will have to actually look at its organizational model and then determine in terms of what is appropriate in the future in terms of the workplace. So for us, I think there is going to be more appetite to work remotely, which we had put in place for the bank for several years now. So the ability to actually work remotely is very encouraged by the bank. But I think the uptake will probably be more than what it used to be in the past. But having to work outside duty station, that's going to be a big question mark, because there are policy issues that needs to be addressed. That's wider than what that needs to be looked into. Now, with respect to another area, is probably the use of more digital tools. And I think here we're looking at accelerating tools like, robotic process automation, chatbots, AI, the use of digital twin. So the fact, like a bank like ours, where it's required for us to actually go down on the ground to actually look at safeguards that are being put in place when we put in place new infrastructure and roads in developing countries, then it's actually crucial for us to actually have that experience. And that experience could be, the context of using digital twin or, and the likes of it. And so for us, I would imagine an acceleration of the innovation that needs to occur for some organization that see the needs for using these tools. I think that acceleration requires that the trust to use the innovation sandbox, the ability to actually test in a safe environment in terms of the value and the impact such tools could bring. And then how do you scale that in the context of the organization after you've shown the proof of concept or proof of value of the product? So I see those two areas as some of the things that needs to be taken into consideration when we look at, the future of the workplace.
Thank you, Shirin. So I think to put it together, I think what you're both sort of suggesting is that there will be maybe a premium on face-to-face, right? So if most work can be done remotely or, through the internet, let's do it remotely. But like Jane, you were saying, maybe creative work, right? Sitting in front of a whiteboard and just writing something down, chalking together some ideas. Maybe we don't have the tools yet to do that as efficiently as seeing someone face-to-face and doing that. And I'm sure technology, like you mentioned, Shirin, will come around to maybe developing better software, better tools, and it's the job of organizations to be at the forefront of adopting those innovations. I think let me end with just if you could offer just a few minutes of your time to a question that was posed on Facebook. I guess the question here is posed by Ang Aga, who says, what are the important lessons and takeaways that the pandemic has forced us to learn? And what things that we should keep applying, that we've learned now, that we should keep doing even post-pandemic? I think some of this is things you've mentioned already, but if you could briefly, just in a few minutes, kind of mention the things that we've learned, new things, and that we kind of want them in the new economy, in the new post-COVID world. Jane, I would like to ask you to go first if you can.
Sure. Thanks, Taha. Interesting question. I think one of the key things is, I think, learning that we have to be, I think the part about agility is going to be there. It is something that a lot of us, organizations just got tremendously speeded up. And I think trying to come up with new ways of being agile, I think that's something that we need to preserve, and because the pace of change is not going to slow down, in fact. But I think it was a very good way for many organizations to figure out how can you work really, really fast, how can you delayer, how can you get rid of certain processes, and how can you just, when you have to do something, you to execute something in days rather than in months and so on. I think that is something that's important for organizations to continue that spirit, to say that actually, how do I make sure that I continue to do that. I think another thing that is actually quite interesting, and I just like to introduce the concept of, I think, reverse mentoring. I didn't mention that earlier, but I think as we move into this whole digitalization, the digital natives amongst us are really those who are, those in their 20s and so on. So I think just as much as what we learned, I think we have to be open about about having reverse mentors and just acknowledge the fact that actually, some of these things we have to learn from those who are digital natives amongst us. I think Shirin mentioned something really interesting about, you had a karaoke competition. Well, we had a TikTok challenge within our organization. And, guess what? Where did we learn the TikTok skills from, right? So I think that is, but more broadly speaking, I think the point about reverse mentoring is just being open to learning and, knowing that it's no longer just a hierarchical thing where, you look at the boss and the boss says this direction, you have to be open to the fact that you have to be mentored by somebody who's much younger than you, because they will well be digital natives. And of course, in return, right, for the older folks who are in the organization as well, there's plenty of, industry domain expertise, skill specific things that they can impart as well. So I think just recognizing the fact that learning can come from all parts of the organization and being open to reverse mentoring, I think is actually something really important for organizations that want to speed up and undertake digital transformation.
Thank you, Jane. That's very, very interesting to hear about the TikTok and the reverse mentoring.
Don't ask for the video.
No.
Yeah, we did the same thing too with the TikTok and the serenading. But that social engagement was actually key and important to keep the team together under the difficult conditions. And I think that built the rapport, which, if I were to say, was one of the key important elements and lessons learned from this pandemic, which is how do you continue to engage your workforce, especially when you have a diverse workforce, and bring them together. And I think being creative around that is going to be key and important as we move forward. Apart from, I think, what Jane highlighted, the skills of being agile, flexible needs to be retained throughout this whole entire process. We don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. That yo-yo effect is going to be, maybe an acceptable practice before we find the vaccine. So the organization just need to be agile, responsive, and making sure that at the end of the day, they don't burn out. So part of the engagement is also to ensure that you don't burn out your workforce. With the enthusiasm, obviously, at the height of it, everybody's going to be extremely engaged, but it will burn out if you're not careful about the resource and the utilization of your resource. So part of this process is to make sure that you measure and being able to actually recalibrate your program to actually be optimum in terms of providing the needs of the bank. So optimizing your work plan is going to be crucial, and you have to be able to be flexible to navigate those work plans. The other last piece that I would say is, it's the process of continuous learning. Jane talked about the reverse mentoring piece. I think from the bank perspective, we have had to actually continuously learn and adapt throughout this whole entire process, whether it's about the technology, whether it's about new process and new ways of doing business, whether how we engage our clients and our stakeholders, all that is changing and evolving. And I see that as one of the key operating model that we need to actually continue to establish, is to be able to be open to learning. Bite-sized learning is going to be crucial to actually be relevant in the new world, in the new way of doing business. And if I may impart one last piece, is to ensure that, I mean, one of the things that I've learned from this pandemic is it's brought the team closer. We've removed what we thought would be the silos that occur in institution and organization, and collectively we have worked as one, in addressing what is required to actually enable the bank to operate effectively. And I think that ability to sustain the virtual teamwork as we move to the next phase, whatever that phase is, I think that's one of the lessons learned that we should keep. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin and Jane. I think both of you kind of hit on the same points. The idea about learning, the importance of being a learning organization. And also, I think throughout this whole discussion, we've come across the idea that coronavirus really is, in some ways, united people, right? So you've gotten to know people you probably didn't realize you would know so well. So I think it would be interesting to take a look at the poll that's going on at the Lee Kuan Yew School's Facebook page and see if it has changed at all. So it looks like people that were happy with telecommuting are still seem to be happy with telecommuting. I think it was 71% and now it's 73%. So I think we have learned a lot about the pitfalls, the opportunities, and also the some of the silver linings in the new workplace and what might the future hold after the pandemic is over. And in closing, I would like to thank both our speakers for their time and for their thoughts. We are very fortunate to have you both come on here on this virtual platform. I would also like to thank the Singapore Global Network, which is a division of the Economic Development Board, for supporting this talk, as well as the Lee Kuan Yew School's External Affairs and Marketing team and events team. And I would also like to thank the viewers who have joined in, participated, and asked questions. Thank you, and have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you.